Karen Wilson was not your average tourist. At 35, she had already visited more than 20 countries, each trip adding a new stamp to her passport and a story to her collection. Her friends often joked that Karen could turn even the most ordinary vacation into an adventure worthy of a movie script. And this time, her destination was nothing short of extraordinary. London, the city of history, culture, and royalty. Karen couldn't wait to immerse herself in the charm of the British capital. Her itinerary included all the must-see spots: the Tower of London, Big Ben, the British Museum, and of course, Buckingham Palace. It was the palace that excited her the most. Growing up, Karen had always been fascinated by the British monarchy. She'd read books about kings and queens, watched documentaries on royal ceremonies, and followed every royal wedding like it was her own family celebration. Now, standing outside the golden gates of Buckingham Palace, she felt like she was stepping into one of those fairy tales she loved so much. The day was bright, with just the right amount of crispness in the air. Karen joined a crowd of tourists who were eagerly waiting for the famous changing of the guard ceremony. The square buzzed with excitement as cameras clicked, and people whispered in anticipation. When the guards finally appeared, marching in perfect synchronization to the sound of brass instruments, Karen felt a chill run down her spine. Their red uniforms, tall bearskin hats, and serious expressions made them look almost otherworldly. They moved with such precision, like clockwork, that it was hard to believe they were real people. As the ceremony unfolded, Karen found herself marveling at how still the guards remained when they weren't moving. One of them, standing near the gate, caught her attention. His face was completely blank, his eyes fixed straight ahead, as if he were carved from stone. Karen tilted her head, studying him curiously. How did they manage to stay so composed? Didn't they ever get bored or tired? She wondered what it would take to break their famously unshakable focus. It was then that a thought crept into her mind. A playful, mischievous idea. Karen had seen videos online where people tried to make the guards laugh or react. Some poked fun at them, others cracked jokes, but none of it worked. The guards never budged. What if she tried something different? Something unexpected? The thought made her grin. Karen reached into her bag and pulled out a small canister of pepper spray. She carried it everywhere. It was a habit she picked up after hearing too many stories about pickpockets and scammers targeting tourists. But now, instead of using it for safety, she considered using it for entertainment. Karen hesitated for a moment. Was this really a good idea? A tiny voice in her head whispered that it wasn't. But another part of her, the bold, adventurous side that had gotten her through so many wild experiences, brushed the doubt aside. "Come on," she muttered under her breath. "It's just a little prank. No harm done." Little did she know, this decision would change everything. With the pepper spray clutched tightly in her hand, Karen took a deep breath and stepped closer to the guard. Her heart was pounding like a drum, but she told herself to stay calm. After all, it was just a harmless prank, or so she thought. The guard stood motionless, his posture as rigid as a statue, completely unaware of what was about to happen. Tourists swarmed around him, snapping photos and giggling as they tried to get a reaction. Some waved their hands in front of his face, while others made silly faces or whispered jokes. But the guard didn't budge, not even a twitch. Karen smirked, feeling a mix of excitement and nervous energy bubbling inside her. "Okay," she whispered to herself, "let's see if this works." She raised the canister slightly, aiming it toward the guard's face. She didn't plan to douse him with it, just a quick spritz, enough to surprise him. Surely he'd blink or flinch, right? That would be enough to prove that these guards weren't as unshakable as everyone claimed. And maybe, just maybe, it would make for a funny story to tell her friends back home. The crowd around her was oblivious to what she was planning. A family nearby laughed as their toddler tugged at the guard's sleeve, only to receive no response. Another group of tourists posed for a picture, pretending to whisper secrets into the guard's ear. Karen hesitated for a split second, glancing around to make sure no one was watching her too closely. She felt a twinge of guilt but quickly pushed it aside. "It's fine," she reassured herself. "It's not like I'm hurting anyone. It's just a joke." But as Karen pressed down on the nozzle, releasing a small burst of pepper spray into the air, something unexpected happened. Instead of blinking or flinching, the guard's training kicked in almost instantly. His body tensed, and his eyes darted toward the source of the disturbance. In a matter of seconds, other guards nearby noticed the commotion and sprang into action. They moved with such speed and precision that Karen barely had time to process what was happening. One moment, she was standing there, smirking at her clever prank. The next, she was surrounded by armed officers, their faces stern and serious. The crowd gasped, some people stepping back in shock, while others pulled out their phones to record the scene. Karen froze, her mind racing as she realized the gravity of what she had done. This wasn't a laughing matter anymore. The guard she had targeted wasn't just some random person on the street. He was a member of the Queen's Guard, a symbol of tradition and discipline. And now, because of her reckless decision, she was in serious trouble. Her initial instinct was to explain herself, to tell them it was all a joke and that she hadn't meant any harm. But the words caught in her throat as she looked around at the sea of disapproving faces. The guards didn't say a word, but their expressions spoke volumes. Karen suddenly felt very small, her confidence crumbling under the weight of their silent authority. For the first time in her life, she wished she could turn back time and undo what she had done. But it was too late. The damage was done, and there was no going back. As the guards closed in around her, Karen's mind raced with questions. What would happen to her now? Would she be arrested? Would this ruin her trip, or worse, her life? All she could do was stand there, frozen in place, as the reality of her situation began to sink in. The moment Karen realized the enormity of her actions, panic surged through her body like a tidal wave. The guard she had pepper sprayed didn't react the way she expected. There was no blink, no flinch, no sign of irritation. Instead, his entire demeanor shifted into something far more intense. His eyes narrowed slightly as he assessed the situation with lightning speed, his training taking over in an instant. Within seconds, other guards nearby noticed the disturbance and sprang into action, their movements sharp and coordinated. They converged on Karen so quickly that she barely had time to process what was happening. Tourists who had been laughing and snapping photos just moments ago now fell silent, their attention shifting entirely to the unfolding drama. Some stepped back instinctively, creating space as the guards formed a tight circle around Karen. Others whipped out their phones, eager to capture the unexpected turn of events. Whispers rippled through the crowd. What did she do? Is she in trouble? Did something happen to the guard? The atmosphere, once filled with excitement and joy, turned tense and heavy. Karen felt the weight of dozens of eyes on her, judging, questioning, and condemning. Her mind raced as she tried to piece together how things had spiraled so wildly out of control. She hadn't meant for this to happen. It was supposed to be a harmless prank, a silly test of the guard's legendary composure. But now, standing surrounded by stern-faced soldiers, Karen understood that her actions had crossed a line she hadn't fully grasped until this very moment. These weren't just ordinary people in uniforms. They were protectors of one of the most iconic institutions in the world, and she had disrespected them. One of the guards barked a command, his voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. "Step back," he ordered, addressing the onlookers who had gotten too close. The tone of his voice sent chills down Karen's spine. It wasn't angry or aggressive. It was authoritative, firm, and unyielding. For the first time in her life, Karen felt truly powerless. Her legs felt like jelly, and her hands trembled as she clutched the pepper spray canister, now painfully aware of how foolish she must look holding it. She wanted to drop it, to throw it away, but her fingers wouldn't obey her brain's frantic commands. Another guard approached her directly, his expression unreadable behind his stoic mask. He held up a hand, signaling for her to remain still. "Do not move," he said calmly but firmly. Karen nodded weakly, her throat too dry to form words. Tears welled up in her eyes as shame washed over her. She opened her mouth to apologize, to explain that it had all been a stupid mistake, but no sound came out. The words caught in her throat, choking her with guilt and regret. As the guards maintained their formation around her, palace security officers arrived on the scene, their presence adding another layer of seriousness to the situation. Clad in dark uniforms and equipped with radios, they moved with purpose, assessing the scene and speaking quietly among themselves. One officer exchanged a few brief words with the guards before turning his attention to Karen. He studied her carefully, his gaze piercing and unwavering. Karen felt exposed, as though he could see straight through her and into the depths of her embarrassment. The officer gestured for Karen to come with him, and 2 guards escorted her toward a secure area near the palace gates. As she walked, her head bowed in humiliation, she caught glimpses of the crowd's reactions. Some looked shocked, others angry, and a few even seemed amused. But none of them mattered anymore. All Karen could think about was how drastically her day had changed in the span of mere minutes. What had started as a carefree visit to Buckingham Palace had turned into a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. By the time she reached the holding area inside the palace grounds, Karen's mind was a whirlwind of emotions, fear, shame, and disbelief chief among them. She sat on a bench, her hands clasped tightly together, trying to steady her breathing. Every second felt like an eternity as she waited for someone to tell her what would happen next. Deep down, she knew this wasn't going to end quietly. Her attempt at a lighthearted prank had blown up in her face, and now she would have to face the consequences, whatever they might be. Karen sat on the cold, hard bench inside the holding area, her mind racing faster than ever before. The room was small and stark, with plain white walls and a single metal table in the center. 2 security officers stood nearby, their arms crossed, watching her every move. She felt like a character in a movie, except this wasn't entertaining, it was terrifying. Every tick of the clock on the wall seemed to echo loudly, amplifying her growing anxiety. Her hands trembled as she clasped them together, trying to steady herself, but it was no use. The weight of what she had done pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. After what felt like an eternity, one of the officers finally spoke. His voice was calm but firm, leaving no room for argument. "Ms. Wilson," he began, looking directly at her, "you need to explain yourself." Karen swallowed hard, her throat dry. She wanted to speak, to tell him that it had all been a stupid mistake, but the words stuck in her mouth. Instead, she just nodded weakly, tears welling up in her eyes. The officer continued, his tone unrelenting. "Do you understand the seriousness of your actions? You tampered with a member of the Queen's Guard, a position of honor and responsibility. This isn't something we take lightly." Karen finally found her voice, though it came out shaky and barely above a whisper. I didn't mean any harm," she stammered. "It was supposed to be a joke. I thought he'd blink or flinch, and then everyone would laugh. I didn't think." Her voice cracked as fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. She buried her face in her hands, overwhelmed by guilt and regret. The officer let her sit in silence for a moment, allowing the gravity of her words to sink in. When Karen looked up again, the officer's expression hadn't softened, but there was a flicker of understanding in his eyes. "Intent doesn't change the outcome," he said evenly. "What you did could have been seen as a threat. These guards are trained to protect the royal family and the public at all costs. When you sprayed that canister, you triggered a response based on protocol. Do you understand that?" Karen nodded furiously, her head bobbing like a puppet on strings. Yes, I understand now," she said, her voice trembling. "I swear, I never meant to cause trouble. I wasn't thinking. It was dumb, so dumb. I'm so sorry." Her apology tumbled out in a rush, raw and heartfelt, but she knew it wouldn't undo what had already happened. The questioning went on for what felt like hours. The officers asked her about her background, why she was in London, and whether she had any prior incidents involving law enforcement. Karen answered truthfully, explaining that she was simply a tourist who had made a reckless decision. She told them about her love for travel and her fascination with the British monarchy, hoping they might see her as someone who had acted out of ignorance rather than malice. But deep down, she knew excuses wouldn't save her from facing consequences. Eventually, the officers informed her that she would be formally charged with assault and disturbing public order. The news hit Karen like a punch to the gut. Assault? That sounded so severe, so criminal. She had always thought of herself as a good person, someone who followed rules and respected others. Now she was being labeled as someone who had broken the law. The realization made her feel sick to her stomach. As the officers processed her information and prepared to transfer her to a local police station, Karen couldn't stop replaying the events in her mind. How had everything gone so wrong so quickly? If only she could go back in time, she would have walked away from that guard without a second thought. She would have left the pepper spray in her bag where it belonged. But life didn't work that way. There were no do-overs, no magical rewinds. All she could do now was face the music and hope for a chance to make things right. By the time Karen was led out of the holding area, her legs felt like lead. Reporters and cameras awaited her outside, eager to capture the spectacle. Flashbulbs popped and questions were shouted from every direction. Why did you do it? Do you regret your actions? What do you have to say to the guard? Karen kept her head down, avoiding eye contact as she was guided into a waiting vehicle. The world beyond the palace gates had already judged her, and she knew that escaping this mess wouldn't be easy. But as the car pulled away, one thought lingered in her mind. Maybe, just maybe, she could find a way to redeem herself if she was willing to fight for it. News of Karen's bizarre and reckless prank spread like wildfire, fueled by the viral videos captured by onlookers outside Buckingham Palace. Within hours, footage of her being detained by armed officers had made its way onto social media platforms, sparking a global conversation. The internet was ablaze with opinions, ranging from outrage to amusement, as people debated whether Karen's actions were harmless fun gone awry or a disrespectful act that deserved punishment. Hashtags like #PepperSpraygate and #KarenAthPalace trended worldwide, turning what should have been a private embarrassment into a public spectacle. Back home, Karen's small town became the epicenter of unwanted attention. Reporters descended on her quiet neighborhood, knocking on doors and asking intrusive questions about the woman who had attacked a royal guard. Her family and friends were bombarded with calls from journalists seeking statements. Some defended her, claiming she wasn't a bad person, just someone who had made a terrible mistake. Others distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with the controversy. Karen's parents, devastated by the turn of events, released a brief statement through their lawyer. Karen deeply regrets her actions and is cooperating fully with authorities. She understands the seriousness of what she has done. As days turned into weeks, the backlash only intensified. Talk shows dissected her behavior, comedians joked about it on late-night television, and memes mocking her circulated endlessly online. Strangers weighed in with harsh criticisms, labeling her selfish, entitled, and disrespectful. Some even called for severe punishment, arguing that tampering with a member of the Queen's Guard was an insult to British tradition and security protocols. Meanwhile, a smaller faction of supporters argued that Karen's intentions weren't malicious and that everyone deserved a second chance. Amid the chaos, Karen retreated into isolation. She avoided social media entirely, unable to bear the avalanche of comments and ridicule directed at her. Friends tried reaching out, but she rarely responded, overwhelmed by shame and guilt. For the first time in her life, Karen felt utterly alone. The adventurous spirit that had once driven her to explore new places and embrace challenges now seemed like a distant memory. All she could think about was how one impulsive decision had shattered not only her reputation, but also her sense of self-worth. Her lawyer urged her to take responsibility publicly, emphasizing that owning up to her mistakes could help rebuild trust and mitigate some of the damage. Reluctantly, Karen agreed. She wrote a heartfelt letter addressed to the British public, which her attorney shared with major news outlets. In it, she expressed profound remorse for her actions, acknowledging the disrespect she had shown to the institution of the monarchy and the hard-working guards tasked with protecting it. "I acted without thinking," she wrote, "and I deeply regret the harm I caused. This incident has taught me a valuable lesson about respecting boundaries and understanding the weight of my choices. To the guard I affected, I am truly sorry." The letter sparked mixed reactions. Some praised Karen for her honesty and willingness to apologize, while others dismissed it as too little, too late. Regardless, the gesture marked the beginning of Karen's journey toward redemption. Determined to make amends, she threw herself into community service, volunteering at local shelters and organizations supporting veterans' mental health. It was during these efforts that Karen began to reflect more deeply on the consequences of her actions, not just for herself, but for the people around her. Slowly, the media frenzy started to die down, though reminders of her misstep lingered. Every time she ventured outside, Karen braced herself for sideways glances or whispered comments. Yet, she refused to let the negativity define her. Instead, she focused on channeling her energy into meaningful work, determined to prove that she was more than the sum of her mistakes. While the road ahead promised to be long and difficult, Karen clung to the hope that forgiveness, both from others and herself, was possible. And perhaps in time, she could rebuild her life piece by piece, learning to live with the lessons her foolishness had taught her. Karen's journey toward redemption was anything but easy. The court date arrived sooner than she expected, and the weight of the day pressed heavily on her shoulders as she stepped into the courtroom. Dressed in a simple, modest outfit, far removed from her usual adventurous style, she looked pale and anxious, clutching a notebook filled with handwritten notes about what she wanted to say. Her lawyer had prepared her for this moment, but nothing could fully ease the knot of nerves twisting in her stomach. The courtroom was quiet, save for the occasional shuffle of papers and the low murmur of voices. Karen sat at the defendant's table, her hands trembling as she waited for the proceedings to begin. When her name was called, she stood up slowly, feeling all eyes in the room turned toward her. The judge, an older man with sharp features and a no-nonsense demeanor, peered down at her over his glasses. "Ms. Wilson," he began, his voice firm but not unkind, "you have pleaded guilty to charges of assault and disturbing public order. Do you understand the seriousness of your actions?" Karen nodded, her throat tight with emotion. She took a deep breath and spoke, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "Yes, Your Honor, I do." She paused, gathering her thoughts before continuing. "I want to apologize to the guard I sprayed, to the royal family, and to everyone who was affected by my reckless behavior. It was never my intention to hurt anyone or disrespect such an important institution. I let curiosity and poor judgment get the better of me, and I deeply regret it." Her words hung in the air as the judge studied her carefully. For a moment, there was silence, broken only by the faint hum of the air conditioning. Then the judge leaned forward slightly. "Ms. Wilson," he said, his tone softening just a fraction, "mistakes are part of being human. What matters is how we respond to them. You've shown remorse, and your willingness to take responsibility is commendable. However, actions have consequences, and the law must be upheld." With that, the judge delivered his verdict. Karen would avoid jail time but was sentenced to 200 hours of community service, along with mandatory anger management classes. Additionally, she was required to write a formal letter of apology to the guard she had pepper sprayed. The relief that washed over Karen was palpable, though she knew the real work lay ahead. As she left the courtroom, reporters shouted questions at her, but she kept her head down, focusing instead on the second chance she had been given. In the weeks that followed, Karen threw herself into fulfilling her sentence. She volunteered at local charities, spending time with veterans and learning about their experiences and sacrifices. These interactions opened her eyes to the discipline and dedication required in roles like those of the Royal Guards. She also attended anger management sessions, where she worked on understanding why she had acted so impulsively and how to make better decisions in the future. One day, while volunteering at a shelter for homeless veterans, Karen met an elderly man named George. He had served in the military decades ago and now spent his days helping others navigate life's challenges. Over cups of tea, they talked about everything, from his time in uniform to Karen's own struggles. George listened patiently as she recounted her story, offering advice without judgment. "We all mess up sometimes," he told her gently. "What matters is that you learn and grow from it. Use this experience to become someone better." Inspired by George's wisdom, Karen decided to take her redemption a step further. She began giving talks at schools and youth groups, sharing her story as a cautionary tale about the dangers of impulsive behavior and the importance of respecting boundaries. At first, standing in front of a crowd made her nervous, but as she saw the impact her words had on young listeners, she grew more confident. Her message resonated deeply. Even small actions can have big consequences, and taking responsibility is the first step toward healing. Though the road to forgiveness wasn't easy, Karen found solace in knowing she was doing everything she could to make amends. Each hour of community service, each class, and each talk brought her closer to reclaiming her sense of self-worth. And as she worked tirelessly to rebuild her reputation, one truth became clear. Redemption wasn't about erasing the past. It was about proving that people can change when they're willing to face their mistakes head-on. Months passed, and Karen's life began to transform in ways she never imagined. The hours she spent volunteering at shelters and charities weren't just about fulfilling her community service requirement. They became a lifeline, grounding her in purpose and gratitude. She formed deep connections with the people she helped, especially the veterans who shared their stories of sacrifice, resilience, and duty. Listening to them opened her eyes to a world far removed from her own experiences. For the first time, she truly understood the weight of responsibility carried by individuals like the Royal Guards she had once dismissed as stoic figures. Karen also threw herself into organizing events for veterans' mental health awareness, using her knack for planning adventures to create meaningful activities. From hosting art therapy workshops to organizing group hikes, she poured her energy into initiatives that brought joy and support to those who needed it most. Her efforts didn't go unnoticed. Local newspapers began covering her work, highlighting her transformation from someone involved in controversy to someone making a positive impact. These articles painted a different picture of Karen, not as a reckless tourist, but as a woman determined to turn her misstep into something good. Her talks at schools and youth groups grew more frequent, each presentation honed to perfection. Karen learned how to weave humor and vulnerability into her speeches, keeping her young audiences engaged while driving home important lessons about accountability and respect. "Think before you act," she often said, holding up the now infamous pepper spray canister, which she kept as a reminder of her mistake. This little thing might seem harmless, but look at the chaos it caused. Every choice we make has consequences, some bigger than others. The students listened intently, many approaching her afterward to ask questions or share their thoughts. Some admitted they admired her courage for speaking openly about her failures, while others confessed they'd been guilty of acting impulsively themselves. Karen encouraged them to learn from her experience, emphasizing that mistakes are inevitable, but growth is always possible if you're willing to put in the effort. As word of her talks spread, invitations started coming in from farther afield. Karen traveled to neighboring towns and even other cities, sharing her story with larger audiences. Each trip reinforced her belief that redemption wasn't just about fixing what went wrong. It was about creating something new and worthwhile out of the wreckage. Along the way, she discovered talents she never knew she had: public speaking, event coordination, and connecting with people from all walks of life. But perhaps the most profound change happened within Karen herself. The guilt and shame that had haunted her for months began to fade, replaced by a quiet confidence. She no longer saw herself solely as the woman who pepper-sprayed a royal guard. Instead, she viewed herself as someone capable of learning, growing, and contributing positively to society. Her family noticed this shift too. They marveled at how much she had matured, often telling her how proud they were of the person she was becoming. One evening, after a particularly moving talk at a high school auditorium, Karen sat alone backstage, reflecting on how far she'd come. A student approached her shyly, clutching a notebook. "Ms. Wilson," he asked hesitantly, "can I ask you something?" Karen smiled warmly and nodded. The boy took a deep breath before speaking. Do you think anyone can change? Like, really change?" Karen looked at him for a moment, seeing shades of her younger self in his uncertain expression. Then she replied softly, "Yes, I believe anyone can change, if they're ready to face their mistakes and work hard to make things right. It's not easy, but it's worth it." The boy smiled faintly, thanked her, and walked away. Watching him leave, Karen felt a surge of hope, not just for him, but for herself. She realized that her journey wasn't just about repairing her reputation. It was about proving to herself that second chances weren't just possible, they were powerful. Though challenges still lay ahead, Karen faced them with renewed determination. Every day brought new opportunities to grow, to give back, and to remind herself, and the world, that people are more than the worst thing they've ever done. And in doing so, she found peace, not just with her past, but with the future she was building, one step at a time. Months after her whirlwind journey of self-reflection and redemption, Karen received something she never expected. A response to the heartfelt apology letter she had written to the Royal Guard. It arrived on a crisp autumn morning, tucked inside an envelope bearing the official crest of Buckingham Palace. Her hands trembled as she opened it, unsure of what to expect. The note was brief but impactful, written in neat, professional handwriting. "Dear Ms. Wilson, thank you for your letter and your sincere apology. While your actions were inappropriate and disruptive, I appreciate your acknowledgement of the seriousness of the incident. As a member of the Queen's Guard, my duty is to remain steadfast regardless of circumstances, and I am trained to handle situations such as this with composure. I hope you continue to learn from this experience and channel your energy into positive endeavors. Sincerely, Corporal James A." Karen read the words over and over, tears streaming down her face. Though the tone was formal and reserved, the message carried a quiet grace that touched her deeply. For the first time since the incident, she felt a glimmer of closure. The guard hadn't just dismissed her apology, he had acknowledged it, even offering a subtle note of encouragement. It wasn't forgiveness in the traditional sense, but it was enough to reassure Karen that she was moving in the right direction. That winter, Karen decided to return to London. Not as a reckless tourist, but as someone humbled by life's lessons. She visited Buckingham Palace again, standing quietly among the crowd during another changing of the guard ceremony. This time, she watched with reverence, marveling at the discipline and dedication of the soldiers. When one of the guards stood motionless near the gate, she resisted the urge to approach or draw attention to herself. Instead, she simply observed, letting the moment serve as a reminder of how far she'd come and how much she still had to be grateful for. Back home, Karen continued her work with veterans and youth groups, becoming a trusted figure in her community. Her talks evolved into workshops where participants could engage in discussions about accountability, empathy, and personal growth. She partnered with organizations focused on mental health, using her platform to raise awareness and funds. Slowly but surely, Karen transformed her misstep into a legacy of positivity, proving that even the most embarrassing mistakes can lead to meaningful change. Years later, when people asked her about the infamous pepper spray incident, Karen didn't shy away from telling the full story. She spoke candidly about her poor decision, the consequences she faced, and the lessons she learned along the way. Rather than hiding from her past, she embraced it as part of her journey, a chapter that shaped her into the person she was today. Her honesty resonated with others, inspiring them to confront their own mistakes without fear. One day, while volunteering at a veterans event, Karen spotted a familiar face in the crowd. It was Corporal James H., now retired from active duty. Their eyes met briefly, and though neither said a word, Karen offered a small, respectful nod. To her surprise, he returned the gesture with a faint smile before disappearing into the throng of attendees. That fleeting moment stayed with Karen long after the event ended, filling her with a profound sense of peace. In the years that followed, Karen's life took on new dimensions. She published a memoir detailing her experiences, not to seek fame, but to share the importance of owning up to one's actions and striving for redemption. The book became a bestseller, praised for its raw honesty and relatable message. Readers from around the world reached out to thank her for reminding them that no matter how far they strayed, there was always a path back to doing better. Looking back, Karen realized that her greatest failure had also been her greatest teacher. What began as a foolish prank had turned into a catalyst for growth, teaching her the value of humility, responsibility, and resilience. She often thought about the boy who had asked her if anyone could truly change. Now she knew the answer was yes, but only if they were willing to face their mistakes head-on and commit to building a better future. Karen's story became a testament to the power of second chances. Though she would always carry the memory of that fateful day at Buckingham Palace, it no longer defined her. Instead, it served as a reminder that even the most misguided choices can lead to unexpected opportunities for healing, for connection, and for transformation. And in the end, that was the greatest gift of all.